Good afternoon to one and all present here, and I warmly welcome all of you to the legal lecture series. Well, today we shall be in conversation with our esteemed guest, Mr. Rajiv Chaubey, who shall be feeding us with the knowledge on environmental law today. Mr. Rajiv Chaubey is the Chief Legal Officer at ACC Limited. He is an alumnus of Faculty of Law, University of Delhi, Indian Law Institute, and Indian Society of International Law, New Delhi. As head of legal and secretarial functions and member of the executive committee of ACC, Mr. Rajiv is responsible for advising the management of all key legal issues related to the entire gamut of business activities of ACC, be it mining, environment, corporate commercial, IPR, industrial and labor laws, etc., including governance, risk, and compliance. He is also the trustee for ACC Trust, which carries out the CSR and sustainability work across India. Mr. Rajiv has more than 2 decades of experience in manufacturing as well as an IT company. Prior to joining ACC, he was the General Counsel of HCL Infosystems Limited, Vice President Legal and CS of Vedanta Limited, and had a brief stint at Maruti Suzuki, Hindustan Tin, etc. Mr. Rajiv has handled not only governance and compliance in India, but also in US NYSE during his stint at Sterlite Vedanta. Mr. Rajiv and his team has been recognized by various forums and bodies including ICCA, CCAI, Indian National Bar Association, Legal 500, IDEX, IOD, as one of the following leading in-house counsels, teams which he has led. He has been invited by various law colleges and business schools to share his experience with students of law and management. And so he is here with us, all of us today, to ignite us with his knowledge and experience. We welcome you, sir, to Asian Law College, and I would humbly like to request you to please take the session forward.
Thanks, Professor Garima, for the kind introduction. And typically, I would have preferred to be in your campus because nothing can substitute one-to-one interaction because, but we are living in uncertain times, and I think Zoom has come as a big rescue for all of us to, while working from home, morning to evening, we are so used to now Zoom that I sometimes feel that when we revert back to the physical space, we'll have to, recalibrate. And thanks for giving me an opportunity, because it is always good to share experience and to see many of your students, graduate into a successful legal professional. And when Mehnaz from Asian Law approached, I thought, okay, let me take a topic which is very contemporary, very relevant to in the industry, and mostly like my experience has been in hardcore manufacturing companies. So where environment becomes a very, very relevant topic. So I'm not sure, like as part of the 5-year curriculum, how much of environment law is taught. But I recall my days at University of Delhi, and there was hardly anything much on environment law. But this was, many, many years ago. And over the period of time, environment law has actually become very, very relevant and very, very important. So with this, I will just take you. So my screen is visible, I hope.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Yeah. So moving on, see, first of all, this is a very, very general, presentation to share. So this is not a kind of legal or expert advice. So just wanted, and this is not the views of my company. This is my personal presentation. And although I represent ACC in terms that I'm currently working, so just wanted to. So before I start, I think I would like to take some perspective of the Indian Constitution. And the Indian Constitution, which was framed when after we became independent, had, I think, the framers of the constitution, so many decades ago, had the foresight to, to contemplate something on environment. That is really, really commendable. So if we see our constitution in the basically the directive principle of the state policy, as you guys people know, that there is Article 48A, which was actually joined later on, where it says that that the state has to make endeavor for the protection and improvement of environment and for safeguarding the forest and wildlife of the country. This was done in 1977. Originally, it was not there, but even thinking of more than, I would say, 6 decades ago, to think of environment was commendable. Then there is another Article 51 AG, which says that it shall be the duty of every citizen to protect and improve the natural environment, including forest, lake, rivers, wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. So this is like we have fundamental rights, this is a fundamental duty which is cast on all of us. The third important provision in the Constitution is Article 21, which I'm sure all of you are well aware, that it is one of the fundamental rights which reads that no person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except in accordance to the procedure established by law. So when we speak of life, deprived of life or personal liberty, if you see some of the leading judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court, this this concept of life and personal liberty has been extended to say that to have a life should be a life free of pollution and should not be such that where it becomes difficult to breathe. And you must have seen that how Supreme Court has reacted when we had this stubble burning, and because of which the kind of pollution which we have especially seen in the NCR and the northern region during winters. So because it becomes extremely difficult to even walk out from your houses and to breathe, because the I am from NCR, so I have personally seen that you start getting irritation in your eyes, you are not able to breathe. So as a citizen of this country, my fundamental right would include this. And then there is a 42nd amendment wherein it was brought in to say that the responsibility of the state to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife. So with this background of our constitution, I will straight away move to the environment regulations which are there. So in fact, we never had a proper environment law till the 1974. And 1974, I think, was the first law when we had this Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act. That was the first beginning, and then we had certain rules. The second important enactment was in 1981, called the Air Prevention Control of Pollution Act. And very interestingly, just to give you a perspective, when this act came in 1981, certain areas were declared as air pollution control area. So for example, Delhi can be an air pollution control area, then Agra can be an air pollution control area, but maybe a village somewhere in Varanasi or somewhere in Orissa may not be an air pollution control area. That was the concept which came in 1981. Now today, the entire country is an air pollution control area. So we started with specific areas just to give you a perspective. The next big change happened in 1986, where the country was part of to certain UN principles. I think it was the Rio summit where India committed to the cause of environment, and then we saw the Environment Protection Act coming in 1986. And then we had the environment protection rules. And first major change was in 1994, where the concept of seeking prior environment clearance was initiated first time in the year 1994. And then we had the hazardous waste management and handling rules. So basically, if you see, there is one particular section in the Environment Protection Act, Section 3 and Section 5, under which the central government has been given powers to frame rules. So the act is very, very concise, is very, very brief, but it is the rule-making power which has been used to frame various rules under the Environment Protection Act. And the body which has been empowered to make these rules is the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change. Initially, it was MOEF, which is Ministry of Environment and Forest. Now, climate change, with the kind of global warming and emissions which we are looking, I think the ministry's name was changed to add the word climate change. So MOEF and CC is the body, is the ministry which really makes the rules, and that is then implemented across by the state governments and also by the Central Pollution Control Board. Then in '89 there was another amendment and another introduction of a rule called Manufacture, Storage and Import of Hazardous Chemical, which came in. Moving on, in 1991, there was a new enactment called Public Liability Insurance Act, and this was after the Bhopal incident, which actually shook the entire country, because there was a leakage from the Bhopal plant of, I think, Union Carbide, and the emission actually affected people who were just sleeping in the night, and many of the people died, and many of the people had a lot of disease, and somebody lost the vision, somebody had all kind of health problem. And this act was basically brought that every company which is operating and is has a risk of any kind of environmental damage, there has to be a public insurance, liability insurance which the company should take, and this insurance premium which the company is paying will be used to compensate the people who may be affected or impacted because of the environment, pollution. Next, very important was the coastal regulation zone, regulations, which came in '91. And then then there was another loss of ecology authority, which was constituted basis the Supreme Court judgment in the Vellore Citizen Welfare Forum case. So anybody who is actually referring to the environment law should know about this judgment of Vellore Citizens Welfare Forum case. This is a very important case, where the principle of polluter pay principle was, kind of enshrined. And now this loss of ecology authority powers has now been transferred to the National Green Tribunal, which was formed by the 2010 Act. And then I am just leaving this Tribunal Act and Appellate Authority because now all these powers have been transferred. In '98, we came up with the biomedical waste. So management and handling. So, in hospitals, we handle a lot of biomedical waste, and those has to be processed and discarded in a scientific manner. It can't be just thrown anywhere in the garbage dump. And then there was a notification of the MOEF in '99 making power plants, thermal-based power plants, for 100% utilization of fly ash. So when you use coal to manufacture plant, you get a solid waste in the form of fly ash. Now, fly ash by its very nature, if the wind blows, it will pollute the environment. So, that is how cement companies actually started using fly ash to manufacture cement. And then there are other bricks and other things which are being made. But still, while we speak, this is a major environmental hazard, because in states like Orissa and Chhattisgarh, where there are too many power plants, but there's no 100% utilization, and then what happens is this fly ash are kept in a ash dike. So you basically make a pond and you add water to the fly ash and you make a slurry and store it on the land so that it doesn't fly. And then municipal solid waste management rules came, and then there is another rules called ozone depleting substance rules, and then noise pollution came in 2000, and then we had the battery management and rules. Then the plastic waste management rules came in 2016. 2010 was the formation of the National Green Tribunal, another landmark, of having a specialized tribunal. And then in 2020, we have the extended producer responsibility, which is framed under the plastic waste management rules. I will explain you if I have time. And now the EIA notification of 2020 has been, was kind of put for public comments, but I don't think that has been notified. So just wanted to give you an overview of the legislation which comes under the bucket of environment law. Moving on, as I was sharing with you people, that Environment Protection Act is the umbrella legislation which provides the entire framework. And Section 3, as I told, I was just speaking to you, that of the EP Act, empowers the central government to make rules and take measures. And basically the rules in particular has to be coordination with the state government. So while MOEF is the central minister, is a central ministry, it cannot implement these because they have to work very closely with the state government, because ultimately it is the State Pollution Control Board who has to implement various laws, directions, notifications, and then basically do execute a national-wide program for prevention, control, and abatement of environment pollution, laying down the standards. For example, like my company is into cement. So what is the CO2, which is carbon dioxide, which is permitted? What is the SO2, which is sulfur dioxide? What is the other norms which any particular industry has to operate? So for example, for aluminium, there will be a separate set of standards. For copper smelter, there will be a separate set of standards. For thermal based power plant, there is a separate set of standards. So depending upon the industry, standards have been prescribed that what level of in the sense gases emission you can do. And similarly, there are standards on water, in the sense I don't know how many of you are typically aware of manufacturing plant, how it looks like, how it works. So whenever you have an opportunity, and if you are interested in understanding this law, you should definitely visit a large manufacturing plant, which can be a power plant, which can be a cement plant, to basically understand that how the manufacturing process happens and how the law comes into play. That is all about the standards. Moving on, under Section 5, the central government has the power to give directions, and the directions can include the closure, prohibition, and regulation of an industry, operation, or process. So assuming if a industry is polluting, is not following the norms, they have a power to stop it. And they also have the power to stop the supply of electricity and water, because if there's no electricity, no process can be carried out. In terms of compliances, basically the direction may include closure or regulation or stoppage, that I have already covered. They can also prevent discharge of emission in excess of the prescribed standard. So for example, for a power plant, if a certain say for a cement plant, how much of CO2 you can emit per ton of cement is prescribed. So if you are not meeting, and just to give you an idea, today the chimneys, I hope you understand the chimney, which is from where when you do a manufacturing process, the gas comes out, that is online linked to the Pollution Control Board. So suppose if you take the example of Tamil Nadu, the state of Tamil Nadu, the Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board, operating out of Chennai being the headquarters, they can monitor each and every plant in the state every chimney is connected real time, and they're getting data as to what is the pollution which is happening. And if they come to know that you are breaching, they will issue a show cause notice to you, and they can stop your plant. Then furnishing of information on any accident, allowing basically entry and inspection. They can enter your plant, they can take samples, and then you have to submit an environmental statement every 30th of every year to the State Pollution Control Board. And then you have to obtain a prior environment clearance from the MOEF in case of new project or in case of any expansion or modernization. Let's move on. So in terms of jurisdiction of the environment legislation, as I told, at the central level, we have MOEF, then we have the Central Pollution Control Board, which has 6 zonal office, and whatever is the standard which MOEF prescribes, that is done through the Central Pollution Control Board. So they are the central body. At state, you have the State Environment Ministry or a Department of Environment, and then you have the State Pollution Control Board. So every state typically will have a, let's take the example of UP, the state where your college is located. It is the UP Pollution Control Board based out of Lucknow, with having regional offices in maybe every important district through which they, they ensure the compliance. And then we have the Water Prevention and Control Act, which is again handled through the State Pollution Control Board. What are the responsibilities for the industry? That's very important. So one is that you have to obtain a consent to establish. So before you start a new plant, a manufacturing plant, or it can be anything, any manufacturing process, it can be even a ready-made garment unit, or it can be an automobile company, you need a consent to establish. Why this is required? Because when you are setting up the plant, they need to understand that what is the manufacturing process, what are the emissions you will be doing, from where you will get water, what will happen to the treated water, whether there is any water body or any national monument, what will be the impact on environment, how much of green belt you have to do, what are the environment measures you will take, what is the kind of pollution control equipments which you will be purchasing or investing. So all those conditions are prescribed in the consent to establish. That is one time in the life of the plant, assuming. So suppose if I am a cement company, manufacturing company, my consent to establish will provide how much tons of cement I can produce per day. So assuming it can be 10,000 tons per day. So I cannot produce more than 10,000. If I want to double my capacity, I have to go and amend my consent to establish. Then comes the consent to operate. After you have established the plant, the pollution control department will come, inspect, and once they are satisfied, they will give you a consent to operate, which is issued for generally for red category industry. And when I say red category, means highly polluting industry, it is for 1 year. In certain states, they even give for 3 years. And after that, it has to be periodically renewed. And as far as CTO is concerned, you have to apply 3 months before the expiry, along with the fee which is prescribed. As far as Water Act is concerned, if you apply for renewal of the CTO and the authorities do not respond for 4 months, then the consent to operate is automatically renewed. But as far as Air Act is concerned, there is no automatic renewal. So this is a major challenge for the industry, because the way our pollution control boards operate, this is one of the challenges which we face as General Counsel, that sometimes the consents are not operate, and then you have you are thrown into a situation where you may not have a valid renewal, whether you should stop the plant or whether you should approach the court of law. So that's the dilemma. Any refusal of consent has to be recorded in writing, and opportunity of being heard has to be given. Then there is a water cess which you have to pay every year, sorry, every periodically, and you have to affix water meters as per the prescribed standards. And then there are certain rebate and all which I'm skipping. Coming back to the Water Act, as I told, basically, this act basically expects that you are not discharging any kind of effluent. And what is effluent? When you do the manufacturing, you use water. Now that water gets mixed with certain oil, grease, and other process related things, and the water cannot be discharged outside your factory into any river, well, stream, water body. You have to, depending upon what is the condition, you have to either recycle the water. So you have to basically we have to basically install a ETP, which is called effluent treatment plant. It is called effluent treatment plant, where the dirty processed water goes into the plant. You will remove all the solid waste from the water, the oil, the grease, and other dirty things. And then you will get again a fresh water, which can be again recycled into the process. Because water, is the most scarce commodity today, and industry uses huge quantity of water, especially if you are a aluminum smelter or a copper smelter, or you are an iron and steel plant. Or in cement, the water consumption is less, but all this mineral based industry or even power uses huge amount of water. So water can be reprocessed. You can't be when this law was made originally in 1974, I think people used to discharge it into the stream. So they had to treat and then discharge. But now most of the latest is that you are supposed to be a zero discharge plant. That means you will not be discharging the effluent into either on land or into water bodies, because that will go and pollute the groundwater, because अगर हम पानी को जमीन पे छोड़ते हैं तो वो पानी परकोलेट होके हमारा जो वाटर टेबल है जमीन के नीचे, because when we suppose in our villages you must have seen hand pumps or bore wells. So when you extract the water, you get fresh water assuming there is no pollution. But if some industry is there and they start discharging these pollutants, polluted water into the ground, it goes and it pollutes the groundwater. So in fact, if you are interested, if you do a research, Google research on the kind of water pollution which is there in the eastern UP, especially around Varanasi, Gazipur, Balia and all, the entire effluent which is being discharged from Kanpur, the tanneries, the impact is being felt downstream, some 400-500 kilometers, where people are getting various kind of disease by consuming water from the hand pump or the bore well, because it has been found that there are heavy metals in the water which is there below the ground. So that's in my view a criminal offense, where one industry operates in a very negligent manner. And not to forget, I think many of our municipal corporations are also a big contributor, where they are discharging sewage and all kind of dirty things into the river Ganges and Yamuna, which then carries, and even the rivers are getting polluted. So I think this is a very relevant law, which, because it's a threat to the humanity. If we can't get clean air and can't get clean water, this is the basic. So basically, coming back to my presentation, the restriction on establishment is that you have to take a prior consent, and you have to comply with the consent. So suppose if you have to install, the consent condition may have that you have to install a ETP, you have to install a STP. STP is sewage treatment plant. So all the toilets in the plant, it has liquid also that goes to the sewage treatment plant, where water is separated and the sewage is then dumped into a secured landfill. Moving on, 1 minute. As far as air pollution is concerned, you have to again take a consent to establish, consent to operate, and you should not be discharging air pollutant in excess of the standards. And then basically you have to allow entry of the State Pollution Control Board to inspect your premises and get your consents renewed. So very similar. In case of water, it is liquid. In case of air, it's in the air form. So you must have seen many industry throwing out black smoke, which may have sulfur dioxide, which may have carbon dioxide, nitrogen. It can be any gas, which is so. For example, I gave the example of stubble burning. So farmers, when they burn this stubble, basically what you are emitting carbon dioxide, which gets because of the typical weather condition during winters, when the temperature is lower. So all these pollutants, they settle at a lower level, and then you have you are not able to breathe properly, because the climatic condition is such that the pollutants come at a very lower level and creates a bigger problem. And at that point of time, especially during winters, there is no wind also, because sometimes if the wind is strong, say for example, as I speak, I am currently in Mumbai. Because of the cyclone, the sky is so clear that from my house I am able to see the Marine Drive, which is 10 kilometers away, which is not normally visible on a normal day, because there are pollutants in the atmosphere which does not even give you a proper visibility. And I think in monsoons you must have seen that the sky is much blue and clean. Why? Because of the rainfall, all the suspended particulate matter, which we call it SPM, which are जिसको कहते हैं fine particles of carbon and other pollutants, because of the rain it settles in the ground, and then there is also wind, and you can see a much clearer sky. So pollution, remember, is a factor of what kind of industry, or so many of the cities, like you must have seen in Gazipur, there is a huge garbage dump. When you drive on the NH24 from towards maybe Hapur, you must have seen a huge garbage dump at the Gazipur waste. So even those things also create pollution. Moving on, 1 minute. Why is the slide not? So again, under the Air Act, you have to apply for renewal of your consent to operate, and if they come for inspection, they will give you a notice for inspection. And one important aspect is that if they visit your plant and they say, suppose as far as water is concerned, if they are drawing any sample, there are procedures for drawing sample where 2 samples has to be taken. One they will take, one they will give you. It will be sealed and signed, and those samples are then taken to environmental laboratories, where they will test the water whether it is having any kind of elements which is beyond the limits which is prescribed. So sampling is a very important aspect. Moving on, in terms of hazardous waste management, basically you depending upon the industry, one has to check the kind of waste which is generated, and the waste has to be disposed by taking a proper authorization for treatment of those hazardous waste. And basically you have to take steps to reduce as far as waste is concerned, and recover and recycle of the waste. And one has to ensure that there is a proper collection, reception, treatment, and storage of the hazardous waste. And one has to apply for the authorization and maintain records in Form 3 in terms of handling various hazardous waste. And you have to submit an annual return in the form of Form 5. If there is any accident, you have to report. As far as transportation of hazardous waste is concerned, they have to be properly labeled, packed, and transported as per the hazardous waste rules and motor vehicle rules, because you can't carry waste in an open truck. It has to be properly covered so that it does not spread any kind of pollution en route when it is getting moved from the factory to a company which is into hazardous waste process. So for example, in our company, we have a division called GeoCycle. So what we do is that we collect plastic waste from the municipal waste, and those plastic waste is carried out segregated at our plant, and we basically use that plastic waste in the cement kilns. So in the cement kilns, the temperature is almost 1200 to 1400 degrees Celsius. And to make cement, you basically use coal or petcoke to instigate the chemical process of limestone and other ingredients to make cement. So instead of firing coal or petcoke, we use plastic waste, and that plastic gets burned and completely loses its character and it becomes part of the cement. So this is a major drive or contribution by cement companies, including ACC, and I think Lafarge Holcim is one of the leading companies in India and even globally to reduce the plastic waste from the country, because this is one of the most scientific way of disposing plastic. Because currently, even going by the recent cyclone Taukte, which also hit Mumbai, the entire gateway of India was flooded with plastic waste. And the way we are consuming plastic today, it is being said that the oceans will have more plastic than fishes. So I think plastic is a big nuisance. And if time permits, there is another section in my presentation called the extended producer's responsibility, which is called EPR under the plastic waste management rules, where any company which is using plastic, whether it is Hindustan Unilever, Nestle, or Tata Tea, or even cement company uses cement bags, they have to ensure that if they are using 10,000 tons of plastic for packaging various products, they have to dispose 10,000 tons of plastic. And how do they dispose? Companies like us, which are cement companies, which have a platform where they can process plastic as a substitute for coal or petcoke, we give certificates to companies like Hindustan Liver that yes, we have disposed so much of plastic. So while we and then there are other companies which are in the process of disposing this plastic in a scientific manner. So that kind of regulation has been brought to as a responsibility of the producer importers to dispose 100% of the plastic which they are consuming as part of their packaging. Just wanted to give you that perspective. Moving on. The slide doesn't move. One minute, I think there is some issue. Sorry. Then there is manufacture, storage, and import of hazardous chemical rules, where if you are handling a hazardous chemical, there are certain rules and regulations, especially in terms of master safety data sheet, because handling such a substance can lead to a kind of explosion and other circumstances. So that has to be stored, and there has to be a proper protocol in terms of handling such hazardous waste. I'll just skip this. Then Public Liability Insurance Act, as I have already told, that any owner who has a paid up capital of basically owner has to draw insurance policy. The paid up capital is more than 50 crores, and additional amount has to be given to the Environment Relief Fund. And in case, God forbid, if there is any accident, this policy can be used to pay compensation. This is another act which was brought. Now I'll come to the most important part, which is the environment clearance. And we spoke about taking consent to establish. I think even before you take consent to establish, you have to take an environment clearance. So assuming that I want to set up a new cement plant in say Sonbhadra district of Uttar Pradesh. So before I set up the plant, I have to basically make an application, approach MOEFCC, which is Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change, and make an application that this is the, suppose I want to produce 1 million ton, which is 10 lakh tons of cement every year. So I have to explain the process, give the complete land detail, process, environment protection measures, pollution control equipments, what kind of green belt I will do, what kind of water bodies, whether any national monument is there, whether there is any. So for example, if you are near Taj Mahal, just to give an example, you cannot set up an industry near that. So there is something called concept of eco-sensitive zones. So for example, the Okhla Bird Sanctuary in Delhi is a eco-sensitive zone, and you must have heard that there was certain litigation on some builders putting up projects very close to the bird sanctuary. So I think before you set up a project, you have to see the entire area where you are located. If you are say located near a river or a water body, then you may have problem. So all these details for any new project, or assuming I have a plant already, I want to expand the process, or I want to change the process. In all such circumstances, you have to seek environment clearance. You can't, or for example, I also do mining. I have to mine limestone, and my limestone capacity is say, 5 lakhs ton of mining of limestone, and I want to make it double. Again, I have to go and get my EC amended to include the capacity where there is and these are the basically projects where you require environment clearance. I will share this presentation, Professor Garima, you can share with the students.
Sure, sir.
So these are the industry. In fact, if you see, most of the industries are covered. So basically what happens is that when you make the application, the MOEF has a expert appraisal committee. What is that? Expert appraisal committee. And there are separate committees for separate industry. So for example, for power, there is a separate committee. For metal and mining, there is a separate committee. For cement, there may be a separate committee. So this expert appraisal committee comprises of people who are expert in environment, and they may be subject matter expert of that industry. They will go through your application and they will issue you a terms of reference. What is that? This is properly known as TOR. TOR. TOR is terms of reference. So basis the terms of reference, you will prepare a environment, you will do an environment impact assessment study. It is called environment impact assessment study. That because of my plant, because of my process, what is the impact which will have on the environment, and what are the measures which I will take to reduce the impact of the pollution. So those study will also involve 4-season data. And why I say 4-season data? Because as I explained you, pollution has a different level of impact depending whether it is winter, summer, monsoon, spring. So you must, as I told, in winters the pollution rises in Delhi. So maybe in other parts of the country. So every season data has to be collected. What is the rainfall? What is the wind's velocity? What are other aspects? All these data has to be collected. You will have to engage an expert agency, will prepare, will do all this study. They will also tell what are the species, wildlife, birds, whether there are any migratory birds which come near a water body. All these aspects will be done along with the environment management plan, which is called EMP. It will be submitted. They will call you for a discussion to do a presentation, and once they are satisfied, they will give you the environment clearance with certain conditions, and then only you can approach to get the consent to establish from the State Pollution Control Board. So the first approval is to get it before you put up a new plant or do a expansion or a new product. Take approval of MOEF, then go to the state government, take the consent to establish, and then start constructing the plant. Once the plant is constructed, then you have to go and take the consent to operate from the pollution control board, and then you can start the process. So it's a very long down process. And as you know, we are a democratic country. There are a lot of NGOs, there are a lot of people who are always against industry. They may file a PIL, they may file a petition, and this process goes on. So it's a very, very critical piece of legislation, especially for manufacturing company. So, and then we have the biomedical, I will just skip this. Then noise pollution, basically there are certain level of noise pollution which you can do. Not should the pollution, the level of industrial activities should not be such that it actually disturbs the peace of that area. You know, that is why you see that in cities beyond certain hours you can't play loud music, because this is also coming under the noise pollution regulation control rules. And there are standards for noise level which has been prescribed. Then there is another rule called battery management. So basically you can't dispose battery. Those battery has to be given back to the dealer from whom you are purchasing. So you need to give the old battery and then only buy a new battery. So because that battery has certain heavy metals such as zinc and mercury and other stuff, which if not disposed in a scientific manner will pollute the land and the water table. Another important aspect is the coastal regulation zone. What is coastal regulation zone is, if you see the presentation, up till 12 nautical miles, it is known as low tide line, and from the low tide line there is another area which is known as high tide line. So if the sea is normal, the waves will come up to the level of low tide line, and in case of high tide line, the waves will go up till may go up till the end of the beach, and maybe even beyond that. Correct. So basically, in order to protect our ocean, and so that there is no unchecked kind of development, this regulation were formed, where certain there are 4 categories of CRZ: 1, 2, 3, and 4. I will share the presentation, we can go through, and there are activities which are allowed and which are not allowed. So let's see. And why this has been done? This has been done to protect the ecologically sensitive areas like mangroves, coral reefs, which act as basically as a shield against tsunami and cyclone. They have an important role to play. Also improving the lives of the coastal communities like fishing communities, and also to help address the climate change issues and balance development. So if you see this pictorial representation, this beach area till the place where you see the waves, this is called the low tide, and the red one which you see is high tide line. So 500 meters after the high tide line comes under this CRZ limits, right? CRZ1 is very, very ecologically sensitive. No new construction can be done except projects related to the Department of Atomic Energy, because Department of Atomic Energy, they take the sea water and they try and recover certain atomic substances. Then any port related or sea link related job can be allowed in CRZ1. CRZ2, buildings are permissible on the landward side of the hazardous line, and other activities like desalination plant. Desalination plant is a plant where you recover the sea water, extract the salt and other minerals, and you make it fit for consumption. Because as you know, in the whole universe there is shortage of fresh water, while we have water all around, but the sea water is not fit for consumption. So so that is as far as CRZ2 is concerned. Then we have another classification of CRZ3 and then CRZ4. And 4, there are no restriction on the traditional fishing and basically, but no untreated sewage or solid waste can be dumped in this area. And if you are putting up any project which is in the CRZ area, then you have to take a approval, the same process which is very similar to the EIA process. CTO I have already explained. I'll just skip this. Then there are other legislation which I'll broadly touch. There is an Indian Boiler Act where you have to obtain a license for a boiler. Then there are Explosive Act and gas cylinder rules which you have to basically take before using any explosive, or if you are using any pressure vessels in the plant, for which there is SMPV rules. Then I will skip this in the interest of time because there is another aspect of forest. So in fact, if you are putting up any project which is in a forest, you have to separately take a forest approval from the MOEF apart from the environment clearance. And I'm just, because this will and this EPR which I have already explained, basically all companies which are using plastic to as part of packaging of their product, they have to they have a now responsibility to dispose that and they have to get themselves registered with the State Pollution Control Board and give us proof that they have disposed 100% of the plastic. In terms of landmark judgment on mining inquiry, this TN Godavarman judgment is one which is still pending in the Supreme Court, and people keep on filing various IAs in this. MC Mehta is one of the landmark judgment. This was a case in Delhi where DCM Srinam was operating a fertilizer plant, and some gas got leaked from the plant, because of which people had to suffer difficulty. And that is where the Supreme Court basically told that they brought this concept of which you have read in torts of as strict liability, that if you are operating a plant which is inherently so dangerous, which can impact the people around, you will be liable even if some nuisance or if some gas escapes from your plant. Then this on water pollution, important judgment is Professor MB Naidu. This was on certain permissions which were not granted. And in this case, basically, what Supreme Court told is against any, suppose you apply for consent to establish or operate and that is declined, you have to go and appeal before the appellate authority formed under the Water Act. Now, this appellate authority only had technical people. Supreme Court told that you need to have a judicial member in this appellate authority, because apart from the technical aspect, there is a legal and judicial aspect. So it's a very important. And then on environment impact assessment, there are other cases. One of these cases is the Sterlite Industry case, which I handled in the Supreme Court. It's a landmark case where this copper smelter was closed permanently by the Madras High Court. I filed SLP in the Supreme Court, and after 2 years of protected litigation, I was successful and my plant was allowed to operate. Then on air pollution, we have MC Mehta Taj trapezium case where in Firozabad, which is very close to Agra, they used to operate. Firozabad is known for glass and bangle industry, and they used to use coal for the bhatti, and all those basis the Supreme Court intervention, all these coal-based bhattis or furnaces were closed, and now they are operating basis gas being supplied by the GAIL, Gas Authority of India Limited. So again, this is a very, and you are aware of this MC Mehta case in Delhi where diesel buses were stopped and CNG was made compulsory, because Delhi, when I was a student there in way back in 95, 96, it was difficult to even stand in a place like ITO. Your eyes used to burn because of the diesel emission from the buses. And then CNG was brought in and Delhi got a breather, So I think the I will share this judgment. I don't want to get into all these details. You being a student of law, you can get the full judgment and you can read it. Then one latest judgment I just want to touch is the Bombay High Court judgment of July 2019, because in Mumbai there is a coastal road project which is being constructed. So NGOs challenges Bombay High Court in a 219-page judgment, basically said that no proper clearance has been taken and this entire project was stopped. The Municipal Corporation of Mumbai has gone and appealed to Supreme Court. Supreme Court has had stayed the Bombay High Court order, but from an academic point of view, it is important to read this Bombay High Court judgment to understand what basically the High Court has said as far as coastal zone regulation, environment, the impact on climate change, and the kind of deluge which we have seen after rains in Mumbai and other cities, that the cities are basically choking after a small rain. There is no way in which water can move off. So I think all the lakes in the cities has been taken over by real estate company to construct houses for us. So I think it's an important judgment. It will give you the environment jurisprudence. This I just wanted to give you a view that this is a limestone mine in a non-forest area and this is in a forest area. So generally people have very negative connotation on mining, but mining, if done in a responsible manner, can actually help the environment. I can tell you about some of the limestone mines of ACC. You can see the clean water, this is a mined out pit, and actually it has helped improve the water table of that area, because after the mining is over, if it is done in a scientific manner, there is a proper way of reclaiming mines, and I'll show some examples. This is one example of Northern Coalfield where a mine has been reclaimed. So they put the overburden. So when you do mining, you remove the topsoil, which is called overburden, and you make a hill out of it. Once the mining is over, that overburden is filled back into the mine, and then you put clay and soil, and you can do and you can see how it becomes green. I'll give you another example of my previous company, Vedanta, in Goa, where after iron ore mining, you can see after 10 years, this was the original dump site, and after reclamation, you can see a forest being developed. So I think any process is not bad as long as it is done in a scientific manner. I have taken a little longer, Garima ji, because it is very difficult to cover environment in 1 hour, to be very honest.
No worries, sir. I think I thank you actually for explaining every concept in such a detailed way from the scratch. It is not really just important for a legal professional, but to someone from any domain to know all these facts. So it was a great presentation and very information oriented, sir. So we have few questions which our students have sent. So if you don't mind, can we take the questions?
Yeah, please.
Right.
I think the communication has to be two-way.
So, sir, the first question is, the world is witnessing the ever worse pandemic, which looks out of control. Do you think this calls for serious measures in environmental balance to avoid spread of such disease in future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we always say that nature has its own process of leveling. And I was reading, let us take the example of the recent cyclone which hit the western coast of India, including Mumbai, and there was a carnage especially in Porbandar and Uri in Gujarat. Now, if you see, traditionally, the Bay of Bengal is a warmer sea. The temperature of Bay of Bengal is higher when compared to Arabian Sea, and that is where the eastern part of the country, which is Orissa, has been always prone to cyclones, and Bengal to some extent. But in the western coast, we had cyclones. But if you see, last year we had another cyclone, during the pandemic, during the COVID period, which struck, I think, Ratnagiri and Raigad districts and some other, places of Maharashtra. And again, we have a repeat this year. And unfortunately, there was a barge of ONGC which was not brought to the harbor, and we have lost around 40-50 people despite all warnings. So and believe me, in Mumbai I stay on the 50th floor, and the wind speed was such, it looked like the glass because nowadays you have those sliding doors, and it is made of glass, so it looked like we will not survive, and I am very close to the sea. So whatever development we are doing, there is a concept of sustainable development, and I think we have a lot of cloud burst in Uttaranchal, where again you must have seen, I think around 7 years or 8 years ago, the kind of carnage we had in Uttarakhand. Again, last year, I believe, last to last year, the entire Kedarnath temple was full of. So I think it's important to, progress, and we are a large population, so it cannot happen that we close all the power plants. How will you get electricity? Nowadays, I as a youngster never had a air conditioner, so even today I can manage without a air conditioner, but my children are not able to manage without air conditioner. So while we want all the comforts of life, at the same time, I think there is more more to do. Companies and governments have to do work on the environment front, like for example this EPR framework which I was talking, where you have to 100%, you have to ensure that plastic which you are using, you are plastic zero. In fact, if you see my virtual background, this is it says that we have taken a pledge of net zero. So cement is one of the industry which generates quite a bit of CO2. So what we have done, I'll take a couple of minutes. So when you mine limestone and make cement, you are doing more mining, and more cement, more limestone is getting processed, so more CO2 is being used. So now we are using fly ash up to 35%. So fly ash is a solid waste which is generated by a power company, which cement is consuming, and to that extent I am not using 35% of the limestone. So one, I am elongating the mine life, because limestone is limited. After maybe 30 years, 40 years, there will be no limestone. So how do we construct buildings, houses? So on one hand, I am elongating the mine life. At the same time, at least 35% CO2 I am not emitting. So we are working, we are one of the responsible companies. So idea is to be net zero in terms of emission, water. We want to be water positive. So if I am consuming 100 liters of water, I want to contribute maybe 110. Right. So that's the pledge that we want to be net zero by 2030. So another 9 years, and let us see how it goes. So I think more and more corporates, more and more governments, as I was telling you, municipal corporations of the government, whether it is Agra Municipal Corporation, I'm not taking names, whether it is Mumbai or Kanpur or Varanasi or Allahabad or Chennai, I think they are the biggest polluters, who are simply you see the state of Yamuna. Right. It is no more a river, and that's a reflection of where we have reached. So I think more needs to be done. Very good question, very relevant question.
I think this has also partially answered our next question. Students were very inquisitive to know what kind of environmental safe measures ACC Limited ensures at their end. So that's how you have spoken about net zero as well, yes, and what great contribution ACC is doing. Moving to the next question, sir, what efforts India can take to help combat climate change internationally and within our country? So within our country, we've spoken about enough. So how internationally as well?
So internationally, I think there is a great amount of discussion. In this net zero concept is not only of Lafarge Holcim, but I think globally it is being taken care. And while it is for the government, because there is little bit of international politics also which is involved. So while India wants to grow economically, it doesn't want to overcommit on environment, so in the sense that it impedes my economic development. So I think it has to be a consensus effort, from every country, in terms of whether, so for example, if you see fossil fuel had suddenly, I remember in 2007 there was a IPO of Reliance Power. I don't know how many of you are aware. And the power IPO was such a hit. ऐसा लग रहा था कि अगर हमने अप्लाई कर दिया और मेरे को रिलायंस पावर के शेयर्स मिल गए तो मेरे को कोई लॉटरी लग जाएगी. I very clearly remember. Now today, thermal power companies like NTPC and Reliance or Tata Power are not, they have to completely change their strategy. Today we are seeing more of solar, wind, renewable energy. So I think fossil fuel is becoming, because fossil fuel again, coal is again, you do coal mining, plus you burn coal, you generate fly ash, which is again an environment nuisance. So I think more and more green, we are moving towards green energy. Even as a company, for every cement plant, we have a coal-based captive power plant. So most of our plants, one is the cost of generation is very high, and we are moving more to grid power and solar and wind. So we are putting up solar power plants. So I think corporates have again a big role to play, and there is some amount of expectation from our investors. So from globally, Lafarge Holcim is a global company, operates in 80 countries. So the investors who are sitting in developed countries in Europe, they are driving this agenda. They want to invest in companies who are good on environment practice and who are kind of working to protect the planet. And similar kind of trend you will see now in India, because today companies are not only assessed based their financial numbers, they are also being assessed by what kind of governance. We call it ESG. ESG is environment, sustainability, and governance. So sustainability is like what kind of work you are doing for the communities. Governance is whether you have the right value system, whether you, so like for example, we have a very strong anti-bribery and corruption directive. We call it ABCD. So we may not get approval, but as a company, as a matter of policy, we don't pay bribes. Nobody is empowered to. Somebody who, if does a misadventure, will lose his or her job. So I think ESG is coming in a big way. So even those companies which are listed on the stock exchange, companies which are strong in ESG will see a lot of premium and goodwill.
Great. So next question is very student specific and they want to know about their career related to their professional career. So while pursuing law, that is BLLB or LLB, which subjects of law should be of more focus or should be given extra attention if a student dreams to be a chief legal officer of a company?
Okay, very good question. I think if you build a career, whether as a practitioner, as a advocate, or as an in-house counsel, I will come later on. I think most key important as a practitioner is that what excites you, what is that is of interest. So if environment is of interest, if you feel environment is a good area, you can get into, you can join somebody who is a very good practice in say NGT, and believe me, there are very few people who knows and understand environment law very well. If you take it in terms of percentage, very few, because I can tell you whatever I have learned only by my by virtue of my experience in working in companies where we had environment issues. So somebody, some general counsel or chief legal officer may not know as much I know because I was exposed. So I think, and obviously it created an interest. It was a challenging assignment also. So I think first is to understand your interest area. Somebody may be very much interested in IPR, intellectual property rights. So that can be an area of interest and you can build over. But my only suggestion is that whatever area you choose, you have to work very hard, and there is no substitute to hard work. And the biggest thing which I always tell in my life, there is an example which I give even to my kids. Keep a thread on the table, correct? And you push that thread from your finger. What will happen? It will go tipsy-turvy. But if you just catch the thread with your finger and just pull it, it goes very smooth. So that is called push and pull theory. If you want to pull yourself, nobody can stop you. But if you are pushing or getting pushed, then you may not reach. I think this is the most fundamental thing. It is your hard work and maybe some amount of luck. Obviously, luck also plays a very important role. But opportunity comes in life and you have to just grab the opportunity because we are ultimately in a competitive world. So whatever, like suppose you join any corporate or any law firm, whatever work is given, try as much as to imbibe knowledge, read, research, understand the jurisprudence, and that only can actually help you to make a difference from the others.
Right. I think that's a very practical way of leading. So, another question, many students who dream to be professionally successful like you.
Yeah.
So on behalf of all of them, I would like to request you to please throw some light on your professional journey, like how you decided to do law, then what all stages you have gone through, the preparations, challenges that have come your way in your way as a chief legal officer.
Great. So I think I have to start. I think I wanted to be a chartered financial analyst. In fact, I started registered myself for CFA course even before my graduation, and only a graduate could do a CFA. So and there was a university called ICFAI, Institute of Chartered and Financial Analyst of India, Hyderabad based. So somewhere I read about it and I was interested in this course. And so they told before graduation, you can do diploma in business finance, and that will help you to get an exemption when you graduate to do the CFA. So I was studying in Allahabad University, which is more known on my hostel is known for producing IS officers, and everybody used to prepare for civil services, but I was not drawn to that area. And then I approached my brother who was in Delhi, and he spoke to few people because he is a journalist, so he doesn't know. So he told, no, tell him not to do this course because it is unrecognized. And if he wants to do something in finance, you should do CA. So I landed in Delhi to do basically pursue chartered accountancy. When my brother-in-law, who's a HR professional, told that you should do CS and law, it's a very upcoming field, and this is 95, year 95, and I think our economy had opened and suddenly there was a lot of demand for such professionals. Because he told you, if you do CA, then if you want to practice, you do CA, but if you want to work, this is a very good combination. And that is where, in fact, I had joined a CA firm also, and parallelly I started my CS and law, but I had affinity with words, not with numbers, I believe. And I did both law and CS in parallel from DU, and then I also pursued this diploma from Indian Law Institute. But after doing my course, it was a struggle because those days there were no 5-year law colleges, no campus placement. So virtually, I used to take the list of law firms, and also from the Institute of Company Secretaries. And initially, I struggled to even get a management trainee, and there was no internet. So you have to take the CV, board a DTC bus. Fortunately, we had a DTC pass. So roam around Delhi to get a training. But I got a training finally, did work for 15 months, picked up whatever I could. So I think there, I would only say that you should have an inquisitive mind to know more and more. Whatever comes to you, just to give an example, I was suddenly asked to go and appear in the BIFR, which is Board for Industrial and Financial Reconstruction under the SICA Act. And my boss told that you go and take an adjournment. You won't believe, I was there in the tribunal. The matter came and passed, and I could not speak a word. That, sir, please pass over. Then I got some bashing also. I told, sir, I could not understand when my matter came. So these are experiences, and I think I went to law firms. They told, we will not pay you much. Why you want to? There's a lot of struggle. So why don't you join an industry? And as luck happened, I joined the corporate world. My major breakthrough, I would say, came in 2005 when I applied for a vacancy which appeared in Economic Times for Vedanta Group Sterlite Industry, and I was fortunate to have been selected, and I was assigned a company called Sterlite Industry in Tuticorin, which is Sri Lanka is closer to any other place in Delhi. It's any other place in India. So it is fag end of the country, totally different language, different place. But I think I got very good experience there, and I was there with the group for 11 years. Fantastic group, fantastic exposure. And after that, there has been no looking back. But again, whatever came on my way, I just gave my best. And I think that was, and obviously I had spent 3 years in a PSU. So there also I did a lot of litigation. I understood, I have done one retrenchment first in the state of UP where we got prior permission and did quite a bit of matters, and working with government advocates was very difficult because PSUs pay very less. So I did a lot of litigation in my 3 years when I was in Lucknow, and that gave me a lot of exposure in terms of how to prepare a counter affidavit. So although I have not practiced as a lawyer, but those 3 years was almost like every day I used to be in the court, because I had an officer, my MD as an IS officer, who told that none of my orders should be stayed. So you have to ensure. So I think there is no currently, today the opportunities are much more, I would say. At the same time, it is quite competitive. Whatever opportunity, because I've seen, I have hired few people. While there are good people, I had certain interns who are really hardworking, putting that extra bit of efforts. But there have been people who just have done law and they just want a job. There is no passion, there's no drive. And I think that is what is going to make a difference. While a lot of the youngsters are very, very good, they know so much. I am amazed. So I think you have to, and law is one profession, mind you, where you have to put some minimum hours of study. Even I do that even today. Yesterday, just to give an example, I was reading one judgment of SEBI on insider trading, where a company, which is a reputed company like Biocon, somebody did some trading in shares during the close period. The gentleman has been imposed a fine of 38 lakhs by the company, despite that SEBI has imposed a fine of 5 lakhs and 9 lakhs on the company. So I went through that judgment, and I discussed with my deputy, Rashmi, please ensure that we don't get such, so you have to read, because law is, I have read the SEBI insider trading code multiple times, but one more reading will actually make you understand So there was one issue of that you have to notify promptly. Now, promptly is not defined. So promptly means they said immediately. It may be 5 days a week. It cannot be 260 days. So and today you have fantastic apps like Live Law, then you have Bar and Bench, and so many where any important judgment is immediately getting posted. So you have to read, you have to make your notes, and that is what will differentiate you from others.
Great.
Sorry
So
for the long answer, but I think
no,
it's
sir,
important to.
indeed. It's actually a wonderful experience because we get so involved listening and understanding things in simplistic way possible. So though we have a lot of questions and we would have loved to continue this conversation, but looking at the paucity of time, I think we'll take one last question. Can you suggest a few measures every individual can take to contribute to a healthy environment at home or workplace at an individual level?
Yeah, very important question, because see, today the biggest challenge for a professional like me is time. You know,
Right.
uh, but I have seen, if you do practice yoga just for half an hour, it actually improves your one. You will not feel lazy. You will feel fresh, energetic, and it is also good for health. So, you don't have to go to the gym and build your biceps. Some floor exercise with a mat, just move your body around. Because today, what is happening, especially during pandemic, there is no movement. And
Right.
even otherwise, I just sit in my car, go to my office, sit in the cabin, and come down. So, there's this body is meant, we have hands, we have fingers. These are all meant to be used. So I think it's important to be very, very healthy. I'm not saying this only because of the current pandemic, but even otherwise.
Right.
Little bit of yoga, breathing exercise, alom vilom, kapal bharti, all these things actually helps you improve, and it is not difficult. It is just having, my parents used to always say, get up early in the morning and study. And I used to always tell that, what is this? Now, even my children, I have a daughter who is in class 12. She studies the whole night, gets up at 10 o'clock. It is her life, I don't want to say. But then the whole routine gets disturbed. So I think there are some natural ways of living. Once in a weekend, you do a party, no problem. But don't make it a every day, because somewhere it impacts your body. So sleep in time, eat well, eat healthy. Don't meet negative people in life. Don't meet people who are insecure, because they will always give you negative and negative energy. Don't speak negative about people. Even in office, I have seen people who are bad mouthing. यार वो ऐसा है ये ऐसा है. I just don't listen to that. I do my job. I focus on my job and spend time with family, friends, and that's how we enjoy life.
Thank you, sir, for suggesting such constructive ways in which we can look at life and lead our lives.
Yes,
And
yes.
indeed, it was a wonderful session. I think in very, very simple ways, we've all understood the hooks and corners of the environmental law. Indeed, it was a great time, and it's a pleasure to have you. So, on behalf of the Asian Law College, I would like to present a memento to you for your presence. Can we please
Thank
have the
you.
memento?
Thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you, sir,
nice of you.
once again.
Thank you.
And we look
Thank
forward
you.
to a continued association with you, sir.
Sure, sure. All the best to the entire staff of Asian Law College students, and hope you all are safe. Keep extreme precaution. Don't lower the guard, because the pandemic is still there. It is going to remain for another 1 year at least, is my assessment, unless we develop a herd immunity and we
Mhm.
all get vaccinated. Difficult time, but I think good times will come.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, once again. Thank you.